Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors, and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. My name is Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, starting with Dirk.
I'm Dirk Ashton, author of the Paternus trilogy. And the real fact is Anthony Ryan writes all my books. It's the only reason they're halfway decent.
Mike.
Led me into
it. Michael R. Fletcher, author of Blackstone Heart and stuff.
And we are joined again by the wonderful Anthony Ryan. Anthony, welcome back to the show.
Hello, I'm Anthony Ryan, author of the Raven Shadow trilogy, Draconis Memoria trilogy, Raven's Blade duology, and the upcoming Covenant of Steel trilogy, which begins with the Pariah.
Awesome. And I believe, Mike, you wanted to kick off the discussions this episode with some questions.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like how the Pariah felt like something clicked, like for you as a writer. Somehow it was, and I'm not good at sort of picking stuff apart and understanding what's going on. It just felt different and read a little different than some of the previous stuff I've read from you. Like, what was there something that really clicked for you? Was it the story? Was it a decision to was it the point of view that just sort of really worked? Like what sort of triggered that book for you? What pulled you, I guess, along that path?
It's one of those things when I'm writing anything I'm writing, the experience of writing it doesn't feel that different from writing anything else I've written. It's always, just working at it day after, come up with something worthwhile at the end of it. I think with this, I hadn't written a full length, really, of anything more than 50,000 words from a first person point of view before. And there's something about inhabiting, just one character's point of view for that length of time. I mean, this is I think book one of this is, the Pariah is about 190,000 words or something. So, it's a reasonably long book. And I think I think getting into one character's head for that length of time is, it's an interesting exercise. And I think there's something about it, if you can do it right, will be compelling for the reader. It's a tricky line to walk because Alwyn, my main character, is not always sympathetic. He's not quite an anti-hero. He's certainly not a villain, but he's not always heroic either. And it's trying to come up with a life for him that was where people wouldn't run in horror from what a terrible human being he was. Still retain some sympathy for him, whilst also the fact that, he can be a bit of a bastard and he can do terrible things from time to time. And I think because he's not automatically heroic and because there's a lot of gray area in it, the line between good guy and bad guy is constantly shifting. I think in this book, it's the first time I've done that where it's been that gray, that morally gray. Maybe that was, what made it more encapsulate people, maybe.
Cool. Yeah, whatever it is, it worked. I mean, first person can be really difficult. I know, like the first time I tried to write first person, I bombed. Like, it was so terrible. I
don't find it that difficult. I don't really feel it to be any more difficult than writing third person. What does trip me up when the few times I've tried it, I've never published anything in it, but is present tense. Tenses seem to trip me up more than point of view. I don't know why, but it's one of those things.
I definitely feel that it is harder to kind of work your head around, present tense, whereas I guess just because like we don't read many books that are present tense usually, so there's probably a fairly even split between first and third point of views. Although in fantasy, it generally does tend to skew towards more the third person, just because you have such a huge cast and everything.
Yeah.
Mike, what else was it? Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I was just gonna say a present tense I found like amazing for battle scenes, fight scenes, stuff like that. And present was amazing for that, and then kind of shitty for basically everything else. Like the Ghosts of Tomorrow, the very first draft of that was a present tense. And the huge mech battle scenes were really worked well, and the rest of it didn't work at all. And then when I rewrote the whole thing as a third past tense, everything else clicked, and the book became overall stronger, and the fight scenes kind of just lost something. They became like, they lost some pop there.
I think if it's done well, the reader tends to forget that it's in present tense, or they don't remember it in present tense. I think Chuck Wendig, doesn't he write everything in present tense? Most things.
I think so. I haven't read anything by him, but
Yeah,
I feel that he does.
I read Blackbird. Is that his first? Yeah. I read that, and I can't, to tell you the truth, I can't remember. Because I write in present tense, or I did for Paternus, and people either just read it and they like it because they've read The Martian, or not The Martian, they've read Red Rising and Hunger Games, and they grew up reading some more YA kind of stuff, and a lot of that is present tense, so it doesn't bother them, or they bounce hard and they're like, oh, it's an atrocity, atrocity to literature, it should be outlawed. Or I do get a lot of like, oh, I didn't realize it was even in present tense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how that divide goes.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Anthony, this is a bit of a hard tangent, but I think it's sort of relevant to what Mike was saying before. One of the things that I really appreciated about Bloodsong, and this is me geeking out here a bit, was how it's a story where you're following the main characters over a large span of their life. And I was just wondering what your sort of approach and thoughts are on this technique of covering multiple years, or sometimes I guess even decades in a character's life. What is some of the things that you need to consider for that? And what do you think are some of the potential pitfalls that can happen when authors do that, and some of the tips you would give for authors who are also trying to write books where it is covering this big span of years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, blanking on who said this, but didn't somebody say fiction is life with the boring bits taken out?
Yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah, when you're writing a multi-year narrative about characters, you start them young and then they grow up. You can't describe every single event of their life. You simply can't. Otherwise, it'd be the longest and most boring book in history. So you have to concentrate on the principal events of their life. How old were they when they first, in Balin's case, in Bloodsong, how old was he when he first killed someone? How old was he when he first lost a friend? That kind of thing. So you concentrate on the major events, and you have to find a way of shorthanding what happened in between. And I kind of made it easy for myself in Bloodsong because it has a structure. The first half of the book is structured around their tests in the House of the Sixth Order. You have to pass all of these different tests in order to become brothers of the Sixth Order. And having a structure like that really did me a lot of favors in terms of propelling the narrative forward. So they do this test and it's on to the next one, and that keeps the reader interested and keeps the narrative focused on these individual tasks. If you read it, you'll know that halfway through that sort of accelerated timeline stops, and it becomes much more of a day-to-day narrative rather than a month by month or year by year narrative. So yeah, that would be my tip: is find a structure that propels the narrative forward. Rather than trying to describe every single day of someone's life. It's not going to work. And I think the other thing I see novice writers do, which is, I think, a mistake, and frankly, I think it comes from what I call Dungeons and Dragons-itis, is people describing every step of a journey, every corner they turn when they're traipsing through some dungeons or catacombs or wandering around a forest or something. You don't need to do that. I remember there's a book I edited for someone, and they had a 20-page description of someone stabling a horse. This is towards the end of the book.
Yeah.
There's 20 pages of them stabling a horse, and then they'd go off, have a 2-page conversation, come back and get the horse. It's like, no, you know, I think, you know, we've all done that as novice writers. I think I'm not criticizing people who are new. You make these mistakes and you learn from them. And I think that's a pitfall of the modern age with self-publishing. You know, if I published my first finished novel, self-published it, it was a pile of crap. I mean, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. But at the time, as a 22-year-old, I might well have put it out. If the Kindle store had been there, I might well have put it out. And, you know, suffered mass humiliation if anyone had bothered to read it, and I doubt they would. So yeah, I think, you know, you don't underestimate the power of editing, and self-editing is part of editing, I guess.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's okay to make those mistakes, right? Everybody, I think a lot of new authors get paralyzed before they even start, or they get started and they don't finish because they think they have to do all those things right in that first draft of that first book, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's a real thing. And
the amount of time
the fact is, just write, just write, and you'll make the mistakes, but you'll learn from them. You'll fix them. Sometimes you can fix that first manuscript, right? And sometimes you just can't. It's just, you need to move on to something new. But it's okay. It's okay to do that. You just have to keep writing.
And also the amount of growth that I know I personally experienced going from that first book, which I worked on for however many years it was, through to the second novel is huge. Because when you're just incrementally trying to improve the first book over and over again, and you're just drafting it over and over again, it can feel like you're not making a lot of progress. But as soon as you go on to the next book, you're going to be starting from such a further position out of the starting blocks on that book, because of the skills you've learned from the first try through, you know, the mistakes that you made in that, you're going to be able to avoid them. And sometimes it is just easier, going to a clean, fresh start and being able to go again without any of those scenes that you maybe really like that don't actually serve the story particularly well. So yeah, definitely back the idea of, if your first book is amazing, by all means publish it. But there is definitely something to be said for treating that first book just as a practice, that's, you know, to see if you like this whole writing thing, to see what fun you can have with it. And then, you know, the second or third book is where see if you even enjoy it. Exactly.
I mean, I know Mike, you even fairly recently have put manuscripts aside and then gone back to them later.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Stuff, you know, and that pisses me off to no end, because it takes you forever to write my books.
Yeah, I think writing a bad book is probably a better learning experience than reading about writing books. So many people, like, they're always, I see it all the time on, you know, Facebook, Twitter, people asking like, oh, what books on writing should I read? And I'm kind of like, none of them. Don't read any of that shit. Go write your books, do it badly,
and then read some of those books.
Yes, I think it's both.
I mean, honestly, I remember, I think you should blunder.
Anthony, are there any particular books on writing that you do recommend?
There are two that I think are really good and worth reading, but I do agree you don't need to read them. You learn to write by writing.
Yeah.
What I find craft books or writing books are useful for is inspiration. They sort of cheer you up, you know, they propel you forward.
Give you that motivation.
The obvious cliched answer is On Writing by Stephen King, which is both a memoir and a, you know, how to write book. And I think the other one is David Morell's book. I hope I'm getting the title right. It's The Working Novelist, or The Successful Novelist, or something like that.
Okay.
David Morell being the author of Rambo, right?
Yeah. First Blood, which was the first Rambo incarnation. What they did with him in the movies is not the character.
No,
I've read very different.
Yeah, I think I read that case in the books. You know,
I read that. Boy, I think I read that in college. In the
thousands and thousands of years ago.
In the 1800s, yeah.
Back when there was no color in the world. Oh, also, Anthony, that quote you were saying before about how stories are life with the dull bits cut out. I believe it comes from Alfred Hitchcock, who says, "What is drama but life with the dull bits cut out?"
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, just wanted to flag back to that, because I think that's a great principle for writing these really long stories, and particularly fantasy, where susceptible to, writing many, many pages about songs or banquets that most people don't care about. So it's good to, cut that stuff out if it's not exciting. Yeah.
George.
George's other things good. So those are the two books that you would sort of recommend, Anthony? The On Writing.
They're the two that spring to mind. Yeah. I can't offhand think of any others, but yeah, I don't want to put people off reading craft books, Minecraft books, while you're in. But as has been said, you learn to write by writing. It's a learn by doing thing. I know people go on these, what they call them, the Master of Arts writing courses and all that. I mean,
like
I've never done
courses and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've never had a writing class in my life. But if it helps, it helps, wherever.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good approach to it. But yeah, you can have writing advice books in there, or you can not. But the thing that you definitely have to have is actually writing. That is a non-negotiable. And then probably also reading, widely in your genre, and also outside of it for inspiration too. Those are probably the two big things. As we close this episode out, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your writing process and maybe how that's evolved over the years.
I mean, it's evolved a bit in that I've got a much more structured day these days. These days I track my progress. I have here it is, my notebook with I've got the time I start, the time I end, and how many words I wrote. I've done about 350 today, so I find just the ritual of doing that every time I sit down helps to get me into the mindset. I think writing consistently is about establishing habits.
Yes.
As human beings, we are habit-forming animals. We form good habits and bad habits. In bad habits, we get addicted to things. Good habits are coming up with a way to consistently write every day. I mean, I do write every day when I'm working on something. I don't, when I've finished a book, I'll have a break. But when I'm actually working on something, I will write every day. And I track my progress. And I'm the kind of person who, I never met a spreadsheet I didn't like.
So, Me too.
Yeah.
I've got spreadsheets of word counts for all of my books.
Yeah.
And it is useful because it tells you how long it takes you to write a book, basically. And if you need to speed up to meet a deadline, it tells you how many more hours a day you need to make. So I think tracking my progress is the biggest change I've made over the last couple of years.
Are you an outliner or a pantser, do you think? Or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I do a chapter by chapter outline, and I find that actually I wouldn't say painful, but the most difficult part of the process. But I feel I have to do it because one of my problems when I was starting out was not finishing. I think a skill you have to learn as a writer is to learn to finish. And it was my biggest problem was starting things and not finishing. And I wasn't finishing because I didn't know where it was going. And having an outline gives me the security of knowing where I'm going, even though I might well change it. And every outline I've ever written, it always changes. I will quite happily throw it out and do something else because in every case, when I'm actually writing, a better idea will occur.
Yes.
As the story develops, So I think I will outline, but I'm quite happy to throw it away when the time comes.
That's exactly the way I write. I can't, like Mike is a pantser, totally. And I would lose my mind if I didn't know what I was supposed to write next. I'm just like
between.
Yeah, you're outlining more a little bit.
Yeah, these days I outline the next 3 chapters. So I'll plan 3 chapters, write them, then I stop, plan out the next 3 chapters, like in pretty good detail, write those. And so I'm usually I try and stay like roughly 3 chapters ahead of where I am. And I usually know the end of the book kind of before I start writing.
Right.
So how the fuck I get there, that's the mystery.
Well, I always say I'm going to have to come clean. I always say that I'm a big outliner, but all of my books, even though they're outlined, and I find the process actually really kind of some of the most fun when it comes to, it's like Hitchcock again. He talks about, yeah, writing the script and planning it is the fun part. The shooting it is drudgery. The planning it out is and doing the research, you know, because I'm such a nerd about research, is kind of really exciting to me. And the writing can be fun. And it's become more fun as I go along because I've gotten better at just kind of making shit up as I go. But I have never outlined the entire book because I've never really known where it was going to end. So sometimes I'll get at most a little past half. Well, no, sometimes a little under 3/4, but then I really don't know. And actually, except for my book 3, I did not have any idea until long into the process exactly where I was going to end my book 1 or my book 2. Because like Anthony was saying, I'm happy to throw out and just stop writing and just re-outline for a while if it's just doesn't seem to be working, or an idea comes or something would be better. And that's just what works for me. But yeah, I don't know every scene to the end ever, except for it. I did know the end and what was leading up to the end in my book 3, but I didn't really know what was going to happen, obviously, because I thought it was going to be maybe 180,000 word book, and it turned out to be 235. So I obviously didn't know some things.
It's quite rude when your books become 50% longer than you're expecting.
Something I experimented with, because I'm working on something on spec at the moment, which means I'm not contracted for it. But I managed to carve out some time for, a short, what I'm calling a apocalyptic horror sort of novel.
Wow.
And one thing I experimented with this was a kind of dialogue only outline, or dialogue heavy outline.
I've heard about this before.
Yeah, minimal description, and you just get the characters talking. And to be honest, well, now I'm actually writing it, I'm throwing away a lot of that dialogue in the outline, but I still find it useful. Some of it is still in, and there's a way of structuring a story. I don't think it's actually that bad of a thing. I probably won't do it to that extent again. I'll probably employ it more when I go forward with my next full-length book,
So essentially for that, you're just writing the first draft just with dialogue, and then you're going back in and filling in, setting descriptions.
Yeah, it's a chapter by chapter outline with very brief scene description, if any at all, but it's just the characters, because there was a limited number of characters in this. The way the story works is a set list of characters, and getting them talking in the outline was, how I went about structuring it and trying to propel the narrative, with what they say to each other rather than just description. I think it's a way of fleshing it out. I can't remember where I got the idea from, but I know James Ellroy does a very dialogue intensive outline, but his outlines are more like books in themselves, apparently, where, the outline for his last book was 400 pages.
Whoa.
Turned it into a novel,
Yeah.
So.
Have to trim it down to make a novel out of that.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that, but I always say that I won't do that, but I do. My outlines have a lot of dialogue in them. And then points, like coming from the film background, every scene needs to introduce something new. A new piece of information, maybe a new attitude or something learned by the characters. It can't just be like you were talking about, Anthony, getting from point A to point B. Something in there, a growth between a relationship between characters, something, and it can be something really small, but it's got to be something new. So I'll put that down. And of course, how does that stuff get revealed? Through dialogue. So I'll start going, and sometimes they will get pretty involved, but that and introducing new information and a key dramatic point. that doesn't have to be in every chapter, but those will come out. And a lot of times those come out in how I write down the reaction of the characters or what they say about it to whatever happens. So those things do come out, I guess, quite a bit.
Seems like a good way to end up with a fairly like character-driven story.
Yeah,
if you're basing it on dialogue, I mean, that's going to be a character building.
Very cool. I go character. I mean, I'm in the characters are number one camp, because if I've read some amazing stories, but if I'm not really feeling it with at least one or two of the characters, I can't really enjoy a book, no matter how great the plotting story or action might be. So I really try to. I don't know that I try, but it just feels right to me. Do you work? What, like, people talk about world building, action, plot, story, or character, which is the most important, right? Do you have a particular view on that, Anthony, when you work?
I don't see it as a balancing act. It's the same. Plot and character are the same thing for me.
Yeah, I
agree.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake people make, is seeing them as separate. They're the same thing.
Yep.
And when I have two rules before I start a book. Before I start outlining a book, is I have to hear the characters talking to each other, and I have to have an ending. I won't start until I've got both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you start seeing character and story as this balancing act, and I just don't think that works. They have to be, together, as a cohesive whole for me. Anyway.
Yeah, the character is the story, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a really good piece of advice. What would you say, Anthony, as we close out this episode, is the best piece of writing advice that you've heard or learnt over the years? Obviously, it's extremely difficult and sort of pointless to reduce writing down to just like a one sentence snippet, but if you did have to kind of isolate the things that you've learned over the years down to the single best piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, avoiding most of the cliches, but I think it's was it Annie Proulx who said it, also of the shipping news. I can edit a bad page, but I can't edit a blank one.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think as for one line piece of writing advice, that's very hard.
Yeah, I mean that comes down to just write. You got to keep writing. Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's been another really good episode. Got some quick shout outs for our new patrons. So if you're not familiar, Patreon is a way that you can provide a small monthly donation to support the show if you're enjoying it. And in exchange for that, you can get cool rewards like free advanced reader copies of our new books, editorial feedback, and ad-free versions of the show. So we got quite a few new patrons, which I need to shout out. So thank you, John, Dylan, Daniel, Steve, and Tom for supporting us on Patreon.
Wow.
Really appreciate it.
What is wrong with you people?
Yeah, I know. Why do you want to pay money to listen to this? So yeah, very much appreciate you guys. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon. I think we're up to about like 17 patrons at this stage.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so if you want to support us on Patreon, just head over to www.patreon.com/Wizards Warriors Words. The link to that is also in the show notes. And also, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not already subscribed, feel free to do that. We have new episodes come out every Monday. So also shout out to our high tier Patreon, Daniel Henderson as well. So Anthony, thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been great to talk with you. You've provided us with some excellent quotes from esteemed writers, which I shall be writing down on my index cards over here shortly after this episode ends. Do you have any last final things you would like to say to our audience? Anything of that nature?
No, just thanks for watching. Thanks for reading.
Bye, Pariah. Bye, Pariah.
Yes.
Bye, the Pariah.
If you don't want to do your marketing, Dirk, we'll do it for you. And Mike has it in the background of his set there as well. So that's nice. Great. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for listening or watching to the show. And we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Ciao.